that children ultimately want both of their parents to be okay.
Yeah.
Right. And as you share, children see themselves through their eyes of their parents. They experience divorce and conflict the way their parents are experiencing conflict. And they just aren't equipped or have the skills to be able to handle it. Welcome back to Divorce Coaches Academy. I'm Tracy, and we know one of our greatest frustrations for people navigating separation and divorce is the belief that conflict won't stop until the other person changes. Whether it's an ex-spouse, a co-parent, or another professional involved in the case, it's easy to become convinced that someone else is the barrier to peace. And while the other person may absolutely be contributing to the conflict, we also know that conflict is a pattern of engagement. Sometimes without even realizing it, we continue participating in patterns to keep that conflict alive, right? So today's conversation challenges one of the most common myths in divorce, that reducing conflict requires mutual cooperation. What if meaningful change doesn't begin when both people decide to participate? What if one person can create fundamentally different experience even when the other parent never changes? For so long, we have measured successful co-parenting by mutual cooperation. But what if that's the wrong benchmark? What if meaningful change doesn't begin when both parents engage, but when one parent begins engaging differently? So today's guest has spent years helping parents navigate exactly that reality. And I am so happy to be joined by our dear colleague and friend, Chrystal Fisher. Chrystal is the founder and executive director at Parenting with Grace, recent author of Protected and Connected, a parenting educator, and yes, a DCA certified ADR divorce coach. Through her work, Chrystal helps parents move away from chasing cooperation and instead focus on creating stability, emotional safety, and healthier patterns for themselves and their children, even when the other parent refuses to participate. So, Chrystal, thank you so much for being here to have this conversation with me.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I am too. And congratulations on your book. So before we sort of dive into talking about this, can you share with everyone sort of what Parenting with Grace is and how you came to this amazing book, Protected and Connected?
Yeah, so we were opened as a supervised visitation center and safe exchange center. But along the way, I knew we needed more support for families, ways to help families stop being stuck in the same systems, the same
Yeah.
spaces. There's services that become band-aids, but I always tell people lovingly, I don't want you back here, right? Like I
Yeah.
want you to do better. I want you to have success in parenting. And as we've since we opened and I've watched families and I've seen so much conflict and I've experienced conflict in my own divorce. And
Mm.
it's just like there has to be a better way, a different way. And that led me to becoming a divorce coach and learning that side of things and becoming a co-parent coach.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always astounded, right? One, I think it's an amazing service, right? To be able to provide this space for parents who are struggling, but it's got to be fascinating to also sit back and observe these situations and the dynamics involved in that. How does it sort of feel like looking at it on the outside, right? I mean, it obviously inspired you to become a parenting educator, a divorce coach, to understanding conflict dynamics, and we're going to talk a bit about your book. But what was that like? What is that like sitting, sort of, if you will, looking at this from the
I think
outside as parents?
coming from a coaching lens, from an outsider lens, it's so different. Like it's like you just start to see where the conflict is coming from, and you start to
Mm,
see where these repeated patterns are happening, and you're not in it, so it's easy to not easy always, but easier to see what's been going on and how we can make some moves to change that stuff, and
mm-hmm.
get out of our stinking thinking, right? um,
Yeah.
it's just one of my favorite sayings. My dad always said that, but it's just that stinking thinking. We can change the way we think about stuff, and do better. So yeah, just looking at it and watching families for weeks and months and even over a year, and the back and forth. And a lot of times we're the middleman in some of our services, so we just keep hearing. We don't see the interaction because we they don't get interaction.
Yeah.
So seeing it from all those different
Yeah.
aspects has been really interesting. And yes, what led me to writing a book that was a tangible piece that people could reference when I'm not there to help, or they don't have a different coach
Mm,
to help, or they can have that on their own.
mm.
Give them some pieces to keep going and changing those mindsets and working hard to do better.
Yeah. To do better.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of start with that sort of biggest myth that I think exists, right? And I often blame Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin, the whole ideological, amazing co-parenting relationship. And it's not that easy, right? And some of your work challenges this belief that successful co-parenting really requires two willing co-parents. Right. So why do you believe we've become so attached to this idea that successful parenting actually looks like cooperation when cooperation may not be available at all?
I think it's because that's what our system and society has taught us. Like, the only way to co-parent well is if you can almost be like friends, right? And that's not realistic. And I think sometimes we don't give ourselves.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean
Oh,
to interrupt. I just had
oh,
this
that's it.
I just had this vision, right, of parents at Disney wearing the shirts and the
Yeah.
full. So, yeah, I think it's a false narrative, right?
It is a false narrative. And I don't think we give ourselves credit that we can make a difference for our kids on our own by our behavior, by us bringing
Mhm.
stability and peace to the situation. And not always, but sometimes by just doing it differently yourself, you start to see a change in the other parent. But yeah, this going to birthday parties together and or hosting every event together is not realistic. It's uncomfortable and it's stressful. And even in these spaces where you see these perfect co-parents, right? You're not in it. You don't know what all the conversations are. And people can put on really good faces sometimes. We don't know how those kids are actually being affected.
100%, right? One of the things that I hear all the time, and I'm sure you hear quite a bit, right? These phrases, if only they communicated better, right? If only they showed up differently. And as divorce professionals, I think one of the things that we often miss when we jump too quickly to supporting people and improving communication or focusing on how they're communicating, we're actually missing the boat, right? And we may be contributing to this idea that increased communication may actually create more conflict.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I think so often less is more in communication
Mm-hmm.
outside of serious things, right? Medication, school, things like that. But I think that there, again, this narrative, this idea that we have to be communicating all the time and we have to talk all the time in order to co-parent well, you're putting pressure on parents, and they feel urgency around it, and then they disrupt their own parenting time, right? I tell people all the time, just because OFW or whatever parenting app or text or email dings, you don't have to respond. If your
Mm-hmm.
kids are with you, don't. That's your
Yeah.
time. Get to it after bedtime or whatever, right? Because now you're creating stress and you're creating anxiety in the situation. Your kids feel that. So, no, you don't have to hurry up and respond, and you don't always have to respond, right? Sometimes
A
the
hundred.
most we say is say nothing at all.
Yeah, this is something we teach extensively at Divorce Coaches Academy, right? Where we view conflict less as a quote unquote communication problem and more a pattern of engagement where we're not sort of really truly, or the individual is not really truly looking at what is that threat to them, right? That internal conflict that now is going to bleed out into external conflict. And communication can be both the sword and the shield at the same time. The very thing that leads to conflict or enhances conflict when we're trying to utilize communication effectively to minimize that conflict. Yet at the same time, right, as you're talking about these ideas of communication protocols, right, having a clear plan and what that communication looks like, both in some of that boundary work of when and how, um, but also whether it's needed,
Yeah.
right? Whether it needs to be. So you sort of developed the idea in Protected and Connected about, thinking less about changing that relationship and more about changing one parent's relationship with the situation. What's your, I know Protected and Connected is really a client made for clients experiencing these situations. And I think you shared with me previously is also kind of a workbook, a journaling to get some ideas around it. So how is that book support that in helping the client sort of focus on themselves and what they're experiencing?
Well, there's throughout the book, there's scripts, there's
Mhm.
stories of made up stories, right, of possible situations, but very familiar situations to most co-parenting situations. And then kind of check yourself, like instead of saying this, what if you said this? And I want the journaling piece. It's a place because we have scientific research on writing things down that we retain it, right?
Mhm.
That's just a
Mhm.
given. And so write it down and reference back to it. But that again, write your own narrative. How does this work for your situation? Not everybody else or not what the professionals are telling you to do. And it is for the client, but I'd love to see more professionals use it as well in how
Mhm.
they talk to their clients to set them up for more success. So they're not giving them this idea, this expectation that's really not fair,
Yeah.
giving them more realistic expectations. And so the book just breaks it down a lot into different situations and possibilities, and then being able to make those actionable moves.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, there is a lot of research out there and how when we write something, we're anchoring it, right? It's this multi-sensorial process that then becomes more ingrained in our thinking processes. I also think that it creates opportunities for self-reflection,
Hmm.
right? I go back to thinking about editing papers, right? I write a paper or write something and I can go through multiple edits, and it in itself creates opportunities for me to look at it from different perspectives, to um, engage differently, or also see how somebody else might be able to do that. So in these journaling exercises, I would have to assume there's opportunities in looking at this, even practicing and doing it, to then look at it maybe with a little different lens.
Hmm.
Well, as they're becoming more clear about what is the intention there.
Right. And being able to take the pause, right? I talk about the pause all
Yeah.
the time, everywhere in my life. And not just in co-parenting, right? And other relationships and even for ourselves. Take the pause, write it down and then pause and then look at it again and then reframe some things. What if I had said it this way? What if
Mm,
that had been said to me that way? How would that feel? And I asked my co-parents that when we do co-parent coaching there recently we have a parent who writes extremely long messages and emails and the other one's very short, and it's been discussed that lots of communication is overwhelming and it starts to feel attacking, right? And so
yeah.
the other recently I said, what if you
Mm,
wrote just like a third of that and you got really curious in there? That's the other thing, right? Get really curious.
mm,
What did you mean by that? Right?
mm,
So you said this and it felt like, and 99% of the time I was like, that isn't what I was saying at all. I just asked you
yeah.
a question. I wasn't saying you didn't do what you needed to do to take care of our children. I was curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the writing, you can do that too, right? What did
Yeah.
I mean? Is that the way I want it to come out?
Yes, yes, it creates an opportunity. Again, I love to talk about William Ury about going to the balcony, right?
Mhm.
Expand that lens or those perspectives in which and how information is communicated and how it's received. So there's also this idea, right, about helping parents stop measuring success in co-parenting by somebody else's behavior. So if you were working with an individual, how do you help them define what progress is, or what does progress actually look like in a lot of these situations and these dynamics where there's ongoing conflict?
I think I tell people a lot success is about how you and your kids are feeling,
Mm,
how
yeah,
home life starts to look when some changes happen. Um, we do experiments sometimes. Like, hey, we had, exchanges are not done by us, but outside, and they're done very icky sometimes where we aren't communicating at all at the car. We're just like handoff, like we're belongings instead of children. And one of my sets of co-parents, they practice changing some of that, and it is crazy the difference in how
yeah,
those kids are as soon as they get in the car. Like they're lighter, they're airier, the tension in their own bodies has relaxed, right? Like
yeah,
it's like you just feel your body. It's so amazing. Your nervous
mm,
system calms down, right? It's not
yeah,
it doesn't matter what they're doing. And maybe theirs isn't, but is yours? Is that
yeah,
behavior helping you and your
yeah,
kids?
yeah,
But it says
yeah.
the peace in your family is the success.
Yeah. Immeasurable, not immeasurable, invaluable is
Yeah,
that when you see that change in your children's experience, even if another parent is showing up one way, how we can change the dynamics in that exchange, right?
yeah,
By setting some boundaries within ourselves, allowing some space in terms of that emotional experience. And I think also one of the challenges is um, helping parents change the patterns, the
yeah,
behaviors that they've been repeating that become so rote that they don't assign much weight to it. But as you just said, children experiencing it is so very different. So that success is what I'm hearing you say is really measuring that success by that impact to the kids.
yeah. And by yourself being open-minded.
Mm,
There's so much talk around all the change in our world even right now, and how it is more important than ever to be open-minded to
yeah,
things. We
yeah,
all this stuff's changing so fast, but our mindsets aren't. Our
mm,
mindsets have to catch up, right? Because there's just too much change, and our kids need us to do that, and they need us to be open-minded and set an example for them, right? I talk about that too. Like,
yeah,
how do you want your kids to handle this conflict in their life? They're
yeah.
watching you, right? So yeah, just being open-minded, working on your mindset shifts. Sorry, my
Mm.
foot fell out.
Okay.
uh, yeah,
Yes. So being able to sort of shift that and looking at the children, you're modeling conflict engagement for children. And what do you want your children to experience in that? How would you want your children to show up in that
yeah,
process? Is a lot of what that parent can control,
yeah.
right? So what are some other things? Is there anything else in the work that you guys do at Parenting with Grace that allows clients to focus on themselves, things that they can actually change, not just in their behavior, but in their mindset when they're kind of grounded in that narrative of, I can't make my ex cooperate, or I can't make my co-parent do this. What's that shift look like in the
I
work that
talk a
you're doing?
lot about the future, right? A lot
Mm,
about the here and now and tomorrow and the days after, um, and getting out of the past, right? That didn't work. That didn't work. That didn't work. And that's why we're here. That's why we're divorced, right? Things like that. I think sometimes what we were doing isn't working. So what can we do
yeah.
different? How can we look at tomorrow? How can we look at down the road, and when our kids look back, what they remember?
Mm,
Being more future focused, like we do with divorce coaching, right? We're not therapists. We're not here to work through all the ick and the muck. Um, we're here to move forward. And what do you want your life to look like? What do you want your time with your kids to look like?
mm, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges also is that parents unintentionally involve children or pull children into adult conflict. And because I'm a parenting coordinator also, and I hear from parents all the time, right? In my intake interviews, I'll meet with parents individually before we go into our first joint session, and they share the same goals. They will tell me, right? I just want my children to be well. I want them to be happy and successful and healthy and safe. And then their behavior is anything but contrary to that goal, right? So what I do see is parents really wanting the best, but unintentionally are pulling children into those adult conflicts that have negative impacts on them that are actually contradictory towards
Yes.
supporting the best for children. So how do you help uh, in the work that you did in your book, the work that you do at your organization, of trying to help clients be more aware, right? Because I think they mean well, they just don't realize how that engagement in adult, how they're pulling the kid into that adult conflict.
Yeah, I'm really real with them. I talk about the
Mm,
conditional space. I talk about when you're talking poorly about the other parent, how much that impacts them because they're half of each of you.
yeah,
I mean, and I feel terrible, but I make my clients cry sometimes because it's hard. The realities are real though. And so, when we're talking about you both have the shared goals, but you're seeing somewhere that this other parent doesn't. Why are you seeing that?
mm,
Right. And so some reality checking too.
yeah,
What are you believing and why?
mm,
The other parent's intentions are the same as yours. So just like a lot of hard conversations, getting real, getting down to where some of this is coming from without getting too far into the weeds. But just that reminder, like your kids are kids. Do you want them to be kids or do you want them to hold your feelings and your emotions? Well, of course I don't want that. That's what you're doing, right? And just kind of
mm,
calling some of those moments out. Um, yeah, I probably had the hardest co-parenting coaching I had to date as of last week, and both parents were in tears. And I
mm,
tend to be pretty silly to kind of lighten stuff up at the end, and I'm like, "Do you want to come through the screen?" But they both thanked me. It's like, yeah, they just weren't seeing what they were doing again. It's so easy
yeah.
to fall back into patterns. So just bringing
Yeah.
them back to the realities again.
Yeah, that real awareness
Mhm.
about their behavior is impacting their children, and whether they intend to or not, how it is
Yeah,
pulling them that force, right? That children ultimately want both of their parents to be okay,
yeah,
right? Parents want their kids to be okay, but kids just need their parents to be okay. And as you share, children see themselves through their eyes of their parents. They experience divorce and conflict the way their parents are experiencing conflict. And they just aren't equipped or have the skills to be able to handle it. And, often in these engaged, conflicted situations, parents will be okay. I always feel like parents will be okay. It's the children that carry that burden of parents' conflict for a really, really, really long time and impact so many things for them moving forward.
and it's
It's
one of the
sad.
things makes me really sad is people are always talking about how resilient kids are.
Mm,
Why do they
yeah.
have to be?
Why do they have to be? Yeah. Yeah.
Why do they have to be resilient against stuff they shouldn't have to go through it in the first place, right? So make
Hmm.
it as easy on them as they can. They didn't choose it. They didn't pick this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about divorce coaches since we're on the Divorce Coaching Academy podcast, right? Where do you think divorce coaches are uniquely positioned to support parents who are sort of navigating some of this chronic conflict, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's back to the future focusing, right? And
Hmm.
I think we all experience, especially in the beginning with our divorce coaching clients, they want to really give us the whole everything story. But really, like, what do you want for your life with your kids? What do you want for yourself? What does this look like? And keeping them on that track. to the forward movement, and supporting them in resources when they need them and things like that. But just really staying looking forward, because we can't go backwards. We can't change the past, right?
And change it. Yep, can't change it, but we can be informed by it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and
Be
that's being,
better.
yeah, and being able to, make decisions moving forward as to what, just if it's always looked like this, what would we like it to be?
Yeah.
And, I am a huge fan of parenting coaching and co-parenting coordination, but we also recognize as divorce coaches, some of that work may have to happen individually.
Hmm.
That, joint work is wonderful. I'm all for mediative processes and facilitative processes where parents can work together in collaborating and negotiating. But I also recognize how significant it is to be able to be prepared to come into some of those processes and the individual work that really is required, and sort of that awareness and looking beyond sort of that top layer of what's happening for me. Why was that a threat to me that leaded to this external conflict, and then how can I change that? So I think, as we look at all of these wonderful ways of supporting co-parenting dynamics, I don't ever want to underestimate the value of individual work for both of those parents, whether in a therapeutic process or in a dispute resolution process of navigating that conflict and those patterns and that entrenchment that they sort of engage in. So
Absolutely.
together.
I have a client right now that is just dad, right? And that's
Mhm, yeah.
he, it helps. It still helps. We don't have to have both of you, and they're parallel parenting, and that is what has to happen right now. And that is not my favorite, but it works when it needs to work. And
Yep.
when the conversation becomes emotionally dangerous and causes more problems, then we're just not going to do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought it would be fun if we can just finish some sentences. We'll just do and get your top thoughts of mind. Okay. So I'm going to say something that you can just finish the sentence. All right. The biggest misconception about parallel parenting is,
That it doesn't work.
yeah, right? Or that it's a failure, I think,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Or it's a failure. Yeah.
Not a failure, right? That parallel parenting can work in certain situations and is not a barometer for success.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. One thing every parent should stop doing tomorrow is
Talking about the other parent to their kids.
defaming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah. In a
significantly,
negative way. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That children again see themselves, define themselves as, part mom, part dad, part mom,
Yeah.
part mom, part dad, part dad. So if the other co-parent is saying something negative about that child is experiencing, well, then what's wrong with me, right?
Yeah.
If mommy is a bad person, then am I a bad person?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, next one. One thing every divorce professional should start doing is,
Stop putting so many expectations on communication for
yeah,
their clients.
yeah, yeah. It's just one component of it, right? Getting through experiences. They don't need more. I love that. Okay, last one. The most helpful thing I've witnessed in my work is,
The importance of looking at things through different lenses, different
mm,
perspectives, meeting people where they are.
mm,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I would love to be a fly in the wall in your organization. I would love to see it, because I do think looking at different things in different situations, right? Well, often when we do see things from different positions or different professional headspaces, right? We see something different. It's our own biases and we
Yeah.
place on it, but being able to look at some of these experiences, even as simple as an exchange or a supervised visitation, it certainly, I think, opens up lots of different opportunities, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does.
Well, thank you, Crystal. I
Thank
can't
you.
for joining us. I love that conversation sort of reminds us that while we cannot cooperate, we can absolutely help clients experience conflict differently. And you are doing that day in, day out, and it is such an amazing contribution to the work that you do with your clients and your organization. And honestly, it's sort of the heart of what we do in divorce coaching. It's not about waiting for someone else to change. It's about increasing our clients' capacity to respond with greater intent, greater regulation, greater confidence, regardless of what that other person chooses to do. So if you guys would like to learn more about Crystal's work, be sure to check out her book, Protected and Connected. I know, Crystal, you were sharing that you'd love for some professionals to start incorporating using it with their clients. Yeah.
Absolutely. That would be great. Yeah.
And if today's conversation resonated with you and you're interested in becoming a conflict divorce coach, check out Divorce Coach Academy to learn more about our training and certification programs. And I want to thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you so much.